Hello there, and welcome to the I Never Knew podcast, also known as Inc. This show dives into the life experiences of people who have been through it all and have come through the other side stronger, better, and triumphant. Each story is raw, authentic, and, at times, heartbreaking. One thing joins it all together: the fact that the stories can help the listener learn and grow. Hosted by life coach Maureen, she sits down each episode with a new guest who will empower the listener to set out on their self-discovery journey and start to heal. Now you'll be joined by Maureen and her special guest. Please enjoy the show.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the newest episode of I Never Knew But My Dog Did podcast. I am Maureen Scanlon, or Life Coach Maureen. I am a author, speaker, life coach, podcast host, relationship expert, and all things mental health and inspiring stories. I'm so excited everyone is here today. Thank you for being here, listeners. Thank you to all of you who have subscribed and show up week after week to listen to all of my amazing guests. Today, Today, as usual, I have a fabulous guest, and I can't wait for you to hear his story. It's so inspirational. And usually I start by saying, this is all the stuff about Andrew. But I have to say, I want to start his story with something that he said on his questionnaire, which is one of the last questions, and it really stood out to me. I always ask, what is something that you never knew that you do know now? His answer was, expectations will rarely be met, but that doesn't mean you can't find joy. And I found that to be so profound. And, you know, if there's anything that we can use as a mantra or a motto for our life, I think that's it, because we live life with these expectations and we get disappointed, and it's inevitable. Life can be disappointing because nothing and no one can meet expectations that you set. So Andrew Davie is here today. He was born in New York, which I love New York. He worked in theater, finance, and became a teacher. He taught in the United States, Macau, and Hong Kong. In 2018, he had a ruptured brain aneurysm. And now he's in school getting his clinical mental health counseling degree to help others recover. So welcome, Andrew. I can't wait to hear your story.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
I think that you're going to be so inspiring to our listeners, because sometimes we look at our problems that seem like problems, but people don't know real problems until they listen to someone else's really traumatic overcoming story. So tell us about you, tell us where you are in life, and tell us your, I call it your knee story, the thing that brought you to your knees. So tell us what happened.
Okay, well, it would probably make sense to go back to 2018. At the time, I had been teaching high school English at a school in Virginia for students with learning differences and ADHD. Okay. I had not renewed my contract because I was going to try to get a PhD in creative writing. I have a master's, and my first crime fiction book had been accepted to be published, which was going to come out the next year. So I had a lot of really wonderful things on the horizon. The school year had just ended. It was the summer. I was going to fly to visit my parents. And when I got to the airport and got to my gate, I started to sweat uncontrollably, like I had just run a marathon. And this is before COVID. So I assumed maybe I had the flu, or I was coming down with something, but that if I got on the plane, I could take a nap and I'd probably feel better. And then I tried to lift my bag, and it felt like it had cinder blocks in there. So again, looking back on it now, definitely a red flag that shouldn't have been ignored. But at the time, I didn't really think much of it. And then I scanned my ticket. I tried to walk to down the jetway, and I fell. The good thing, or the fortunate thing, is I didn't experience anything painful. which is really rare. A lot of people who had what I have describe what's known as a thunderclap headache, which is sort of like the worst headache you've ever experienced. For me, I just fell. And then thankfully, because I was at the airport, first responders could get to me pretty quickly. And then I was able to through a lot of really fortunate circumstances, get to the hospital, get into surgery, things along those lines. And then because I'd filled out the emergency contact information, the airline JetBlue called my parents and told them that I had missed the flight. I don't think they knew the details. And then when I was in surgery, one of the doctors saw my cell phone and a bunch of missed calls. So he called my family, told them what had happened, and then they were able to make it to DC where I was.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, and then that sort of began a very interesting pivot in terms of it was, the first month or so, the first few months, I would say. I mean, I was in intensive care that I have no memory of that, even though I've seen videos of myself responding to people. But for whatever reason, that's completely gone, which was probably better this way. And then the first month, I would say, I was so focused on just comprehending what had happened and focusing on the physical recovery that I didn't really think about what the future held or what this meant or any kind of emotional response. I think going back to what I had said in the last question about expectations, the first year of my recovery, the physical recovery, happened very quickly. In the beginning, I needed to walk with a cane, and I could only really move for about 45 seconds before I needed to take a break. And that was essentially gone by the end of year one. So I assumed that the rest of my recovery would happen as quickly, or be as, not that that was easy by any stretch, but it was very straightforward.
Yeah.
And it was really simple to keep track of the progress, because with physical things, there's always an indicator.
Yeah.
It really wasn't until the end of the first year that I began to realize that so much of this would be different. My ability to make emotional connections was somewhat blunted. So I had to, over the last couple of years, really work on how I processed feeling different emotions. And also a lot of existential questions, like what do I do now? How do I move forward? So many of my goals weren't important anymore or didn't seem important. So a lot of time was spent trying to figure out, like, okay, well, what would be valuable moving forward?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's where school, that's where I decided, well, that would be something that could provide value.
Yeah, we were talking about offline how when you have these experiences, you make it through, you overcome, and there's this thing in us, I think, because my story comes from trauma as well, where you can either, they say, get better or get better, but it's also like, what is the purpose of this happening? What can I do with it? Instead of it just being, oh, just this thing that happened in my life. Now, how old were you when this happened, and where was the aneurysm, and do they have any reason for why it happened?
So I had just turned 40 the week before.
Okay. Wow.
In fact, 6 days before I turned 40. And there were no reasons for this. There's nothing caused it. This was just sort of, I guess, bad luck, or, a bad genetic inheritance.
Mm.
But yeah, this is one of those things. It's like getting struck by lightning. So I think what I've read subsequently is that it's a lot more common to have an aneurysm in people that doesn't rupture. Mine ended up rupturing, but a lot of people will develop them. Now, that's not to freak anyone out, to suggest that everyone should worry, but it is more common.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting. So an aneurysm, essentially, with my medical background, I started in nursing, and then I was in the medical field for 27 or 28 years before I started life coaching. So an aneurysm is basically a weakness, right? It's a weakness in an artery. Is that correct? Or a blood vessel?
Yeah, I realized I just didn't answer the last part of your question. Mine was in the brainstem.
Oh, okay.
So yeah,
Okay.
there was either an artery or a blood vessel that had a weak wall in the brainstem, and it ruptured. Um,
Wow.
and
And
I
I mean, I could see that, there are things that are going on in our bodies that we just don't know about. And that's why, I'm really about the holistic approach to life where, take those supplements, keep yourself moving. No one says you got to be at the gym for 8 hours, but, just try to live that healthy life, try to eat as good as you can, get that sleep. And, like you said, it's genetic. There was nothing to prevent this. And there's just things that I think we're genetically disposed to that we just don't know about. And I want to ask you, in that moment when you were in this recovery, and kudos to you, because to be able to just not be paralyzed, to be able to do things and remember things. I know I've talked to a lot of people with brain injuries where they had to learn to walk, eat, talk, all of those things. And for it to be in the brainstem, that's a significant location for all of your functioning. When you say that you were having difficulty with emotional connections, did the aneurysm affect, like, say, the amygdala, which is where you feel emotion? And were they able to, because I know medical science is amazing, were they able to pinpoint where this was going to affect you going forward?
No, I mean, I aside from knowing where it was located, I maybe they spoke to my family about it, but no one, I don't recall speaking to anyone about what potential effects might be moving forward. Um,
Okay.
yeah, it was a lot of it was stuff. And this was another reason why I wanted to get into this field, is because I feel like so much of the support that's provided is more on the physical recovery elements of it. Um, so there's a lot of emotional recovery that you're not really aware of at first, and having someone there. I mean, for me, I was able to hear from people in support groups or message boards who could confirm that what I was going through wasn't unique, and that made me feel a lot better. So
Yeah. I love that you say that, because we focus on just life-saving things, right? In the medical field, let's be real. Why I'm in the life coaching business now is because I saw so much behavioral health things in the emergency room and trauma center that I worked in. And I just feel exactly what you felt, where the focus was just on that physical recovery. Now, I don't know. I kind of feel like it's a good thing. If I have something traumatic happen, I don't know. I feel like it's kind of a good thing that someone doesn't say to me, "Hey, this is going to affect how you walk. This is going to affect how you talk." And I've had people, guests on, who've had really traumatic injuries, and the doctors would say, "You're never going to walk again," or "You're never going to do this thing." So do you feel like that was kind of a blessing that someone didn't say to you what you're not going to be able to do going forward?
yeah, well, and also getting back to your previous question, I'm extremely, as I've been extremely fortunate in so many areas with regard to this incident. Um, my physical limitations are really minor. To this day, I still, if I move my head, sometimes I have to wait for my vision to settle,
Mhm.
kind of like a human bobblehead. Um,
Okay.
I don't get nauseated, which is a saving grace. And since it's been over 4 years, I've adjusted to incorporate that into my movement. And my balance still isn't extremely good, but those are the only physical limitations I have. So a lot of my desire to, as you had said, kind of move forward with this and use everything as a positive, was that I have many friends who are unable to have what I like to refer to as my second act in life. Um, they would love to go back to work. They would love to volunteer. They would love to do anything, but their injury precludes them from doing that. So I sort of looked at this like you've been given a second chance in life. Don't, if you waste it, you're not only letting yourself down, but you're letting down thousands of people who would love to be in this position who can't.
Right.
But
Right.
it also took, I sound much more confident about everything now, and it's taken about 3 years of therapy and rehab and things to get to this point. So if you're out there and you're going through a difficult transition right now, it doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
And frequently, one of the other things I could have written down that I had to sort of understand is that I expected this process to be linear in just a straight line. So if I woke up one day feeling like I had lost ground or wasn't feeling good, I felt like I was failing. And then over time, I felt more comfortable realizing that recovery in any form is like a spiral, and you're going to make gains, you're going to give them up, you're going to make them again. But really, until about year 3, I would say, that was when I really began to feel much more comfortable, and like I had turned a corner.
Oh, 3 years in. I love that you say that. I absolutely love that you say that, because I think as humans, we want to make sense out of what's happening to us. And I call it the wobble when I'm coaching. It's, a lot of people will say, well, it's taking so long. And I go, but it's only been 6 months and you're 35 years old. It took you 35 years to get here. So I love that you said it's not linear. It's the focus on the day to day, isn't it? Because I think you could help us understand when you're in the weeds, as I call it, when you're in that really transitional moment where things seem they're taking a long time and they just feel a little bit hopeless. Looking at the future might not be a good idea at the moment, but taking that time just day by day, step by step, I'm sure that was a big process for you, right?
Yeah, well, I had a very good friend when I was teaching in Hong Kong who once said it's hard to keep things in perspective while you're still going through them.
Yes.
And that was really helpful to hear recovering. So I sort of, at one point, I made a deal with myself, until year 3, really, I wouldn't consider the future outside of, perhaps what I was going to have for lunch that day, or what I could do. But it would get really overwhelming to think about what would happen a month down the road, or 2 months down the road, or a year down the road, which is how I think a lot of us are just conditioned to be, as we're growing up, is to think about the future, prepare for the future, establish your goals and have them, and that's going to sort of define who you are throughout your life.
Yes. It's always the what's next. I think we as humans are continuously, we achieve something, we celebrate it for a moment, and then we're like, what's next? And I don't think we revel enough in just those moments of those small wins. And I think that's something that I always coach on is, what were your small wins today? Just today, or looking back, can you look back at the things you've accomplished up to this point? Because we're always looking at what we haven't done rather than what we've done. So I love that you say that. So 3 years in, you reach a turning point and you're realizing how blessed and fortunate you are that you were able to get so much recovery when others, really weren't able to. So you decide to go to school to do this. Now, how are you living life after that? How are you viewing life after that? I mean, are you just so hopeful now and joyful about, wow, I see where I can go now?
Yeah, well, it's I don't think anyone would suggest that COVID had a silver lining to it. But I had thought that I would return to teaching. So I got a job as a tutor that was going to start in April of 2020.
Mm.
And then that was canceled. And at the time, no one really knew what this would look like. So I ended up moving back in with my parents for about a year.
Mm.
Um, and that really helped because I didn't need to think about the day to day anymore. That was sort of on autopilot. And now I could afford to think, like, okay, what do you really want to do? Or what would be really fulfilling? Because as much as I enjoyed going over themes in Of Mice and Men with 15-year-olds, that no longer had the same appeal that it used to. So I found counseling as an opportunity that seemed to provide what it was that I would look for. Um, and yeah, I mean, I did. I think once I was able to understand that, uh, even though I wasn't going to be able to achieve many of the previous life goals, that it didn't matter. That there were things that I could do that I would feel fulfilled by doing. Um, and even if I didn't, it took a while for me to recognize that they were out there, even if I didn't know what they were. Just to kind of eventually I'll find them, and then over time I was able to sort of figure out like, oh, spending time writing books or listening to music or doing these things are really enjoyable, even though I hadn't viewed them as important life goals before, but they've become that way. So really just being open to things and curious about things. Um, and I wrote, excuse me, I wrote a memoir a long time ago, and recently I wrote an addendum to it that's just about the recovery. And I titled the addendum "Playing with House Money," because that's sort of how I view the rest of my life. Like, I might not, had anything been different that day, I wouldn't be here. So the fact that I can experience it is wonderful. Um, and again, it's taken a few years to be able to say that and believe it. There were days where I, wasn't as excited about being here. It was like, well, I could take it or leave it. And I think that's natural. I think everybody who goes through some sort of traumatic recovery questions everything. Um,
Yeah.
but ultimately, I did have a very hopeful outlook that this is an opportunity that I could make the most of it, um, and that I can physically and mentally, like I can still do everything that I used to do. So
It's I love that. I find that, of course, everyone has a story that comes on the podcast, and I find that anything that has happened in our lives, when it's an experience, whether it's good or bad, but usually when it's traumatic, there's this before and then there's the after, and it's almost like this defining moment sometimes in our life. Like you said, I was just kind of going along, and I mean, I liked what I was doing, but then I started doing these things that brought a lot of joy and really fulfilled me, and I was passionate about. And listeners, the whole reason that I do this podcast and the whole reason I life coach is to say, don't wait for a traumatic experience, because every day is that opportunity to start your after, which is, do those things that feel really good and that you're passionate about, and live life to the fullest. And don't wait till there's something traumatic to have that existential question in your mind of, am I doing the thing that I'm here to do, fulfilling my purpose? So something really cool about Andrew, everyone, is that he does a music review show with a friend, and it's called Happy Hour with Heather and Guest. And he has a podcast about music called A Fistful of Faceful. Ooh, that's a tongue twister there. And of course, he writes short stories. What I love is the crime fiction, because I am a crime junkie. I love, love, love crime because of the psychology. I like to know why people do what they do. Not a morbid fascination, but just a psychological fascination. So tell us about all this fun stuff that you're doing now.
okay, well, and this sort of plays into, previously I hadn't looked at, writing had always been sort of my goal to become, an author. But the music review and the podcast were sort of just fun things I did to pass the time. And I never viewed them as being really important or integral. And now they've taken that place. So when I was teaching in Hong Kong, which is almost a decade ago, I used to listen to a podcast called Analyze Fish, which is about the music band Phish, Phish. And one of the hosts would try to get his co-host to become a fan of the music. So he would play him songs and they would talk about it. And I really liked the format. So I spoke to my office mate, who was a very meek British gentleman. And I said, let me try to convince you to listen to heavy metal music, because he mostly listened to stuff like the Kooks. But Oasis was probably the heaviest he would go.
Okay, I know Oasis. That's like that's what my generation. I'm a little older than you, but I love Oasis.
Yeah, well, so that's where it sort of started. And then when I moved back to the US, I started doing it on my own. And recently it's just become a way to showcase bands who maybe are not in the spotlight. They're part of the underground. And then Heather was someone I met recently who we did a marketing group together. And one of the projects was to start a Facebook group. So she created Happy Hour with Heather and Guest. And then when the pandemic hit, bands would live stream perform from their rehearsal spaces, and the video would be on the Facebook group. So as that started to become more popular, she asked me to help out. And then as bands were able to play live again, we pivoted and decided to do a music review show. So again, we mostly review bands who are in the part of the heavy metal underground, and it's just it's fun, but it's sort of how I'd like to be spending my time.
I love that. And you're also helping people like sort of discover their dreams and get the recognition, because that's what they want, is people to hear their music. And I think that's a really cool thing. I love that we all have this passion for something and it finds its way to us when we're just in the mode that you're in, which is it's fun. I like to do it. I think if we stop overthinking as humans and say, I have to hustle, I gotta make this happen, that's when it doesn't happen. The more ease you are about it, listeners, I say this all the time, I'm super repetitive, but I can't say it enough, is the ease, more at ease that I've been about things that I love, the more it came to me. This podcast is a really good example. I feared the technology part, I feared the recording. Like, I don't know how to edit. I don't know how to do any of that. And one day I just heard a voice, start it today, start it now. And it's just been amazing to get to meet guests like you and hear your stories and impact the listeners that need to hear that hope. It's been just unbelievable. So did you ever get your crime fiction book published?
Yes, I that came out the following year. And then fortunately I've been able to still write. So I've put out a few more books since then.
Wow. I love that. Tell us the names of your books. I want to know the crime fiction, because I'm going to read that one right away.
Okay. So there's a series. So all the books are on my website, links to them, which is just andrew-davie.com. That's probably the best way to find them all.
Perfect.
That's interesting. Going back to something you had said earlier, as I was growing up, or when I really wanted writing to be my main sort of thing, publishing and getting published was such a huge goal. And then when the book came out, the book's called Pavement. When the book came out, nothing really changed. I expected it to have this big revelatory moment. And that's when I sort of revisited the idea of have fun writing them and have fun in the process. And then if they get published or come out or people read them, great. But then that way it's sort of like you never lose.
I'm so happy you said that. I'm so happy you said that. As a fellow author as well, I didn't aspire to write, and I listen to people who are like, I always wanted to be a writer. I never did. It just kind of came out of the blue. And I wrote the first one in 8 weeks. The second one I wrote during COVID, and it took me about 8 or 9 months. And that what you just said is key to anyone who wants to write a book and get published. Do not write a book for the hope that it's going to be successful and you're going to be a millionaire, because there are a lot of broke authors out here, but we're not doing it for the money. And that is just like life coaching. We do it for the outcome, not the income. And that's the beauty of it, is the more that you just say my message needs to be heard, however it is heard, it's not about how much money I make from it. All the rest of it kind of ties in. And I'm so happy that you said that, because people think, oh, you're a published author, you must be making millions in royalties. Yeah, no, you're lucky. Most authors are lucky if they sell 100 books. I'm going to be honest with you, listeners. And that's okay. If your mindset is, it doesn't matter if one person reads it. For me, if one person reads the book and gets something out of it, I've done my job. And it was fun. It was fun to write. That's why I don't believe in writer's block. What do you think about writer's block?
Well, I mean, I think there are a lot of people. When I was teaching creative writing, one thing I would always suggest is people get caught up in needing the circumstances in which they write to be perfect. And I would always try to disabuse them of that and say, well, you're not always in control of the situation. Sometimes there's music, sometimes there's people talking, sometimes you can only write at a coffee shop, not at home. So get used to being able to adapt. And I sort of think the same thing about there are methods that you can use if you're stuck to reinvigorate everything. So
I love that, especially because you were a teacher of students with ADHD. My son has ADHD. I have ADD. My daughter has ADHD. I mean, I'm well versed in focus issues. I'm not a fan of labels, but I do call them focus issues. And you're right that you have to learn how to tune things out. It's like meditating. You have to learn how to just really go inside and tune everything out. What I found helpful, and I want to see if you agree with me, was I would only write when I felt good about writing. And when I had something to, wherever it was or whatever it was, I would not pressure myself and say, today I have to write 3 chapters. It was like I could go a week and only write for 15 minutes in a week, because I was just determined I'm only going to write when it feels good, because that's when my work will be the best, when I'm flowing and I'm at ease. What do you think? Did that help? Is any method like that help you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would always give the analogy of training as an athlete for a sport. If you think of like long distance running. So if you say to yourself, well, I'm going to try to run for 20 minutes a day, it doesn't really matter how far you go, because over time you'll condition yourself to be able to run for longer. Yeah. So, some people get caught up in hearing, Stephen King writes 10,000 words a day, so I should probably write like 2,000 words a day or something. And then you just set these really impossible standards for yourself. And then when you don't hit it, you feel like you're failing. So I think finding the balance between, certainly don't try to write when you don't feel inspired. Yeah. But the more you sit down and condition yourself, the more the easier it is for inspiration to hit you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. More at ease, the more at ease you are. I love that you say that. And back to, what you had said about, the expectations, if you put more expectations on yourself, the less joy you can feel, which means you're putting that block and that resistance in front of you. So, I want to know, as a mom, because I have 3 grown children and 3 grandchildren, how did your parents handle everything that you went through? It sounds like they were so supportive and so loving, and you're very blessed to have them there for you. How'd they handle that?
Well, they were incredible in terms of being supportive and helpful and things along those lines. It was interesting to kind of hear. My mother would send emails out to everybody, which I read later on. So I got to see kind of how difficult it had been for them. Um, I remember my brother told me having to go tell my father that I might not make it at one point
Oh
because
my
I'd had a
God.
second bleed. So hearing about those sorts of things was probably more difficult than my own personal experience because by the time I was cognizant, I had sort of made it through the woods. So
Mm.
I didn't really understand the gravity of everything. Um, so yeah, I think it was probably really difficult at the time. Um, what's been wonderful now is that we've all, I think, felt really great about my recovery. So we can afford to be a little bit less. Um, we can. I like to look at a lot of things that happen to me now in a humorous way. Um, there are a lot of funny stories that probably wouldn't have been funny at the time. But for example, uh, and this plays into how great my mother is. When they were in the ICU with me, I said that an assassin was coming to kill everybody, so we had to leave. My mother told me that she just spoke to the assassin on the phone, and he agreed to cancel everything, so he's not coming. So, which again, probably at the time not so funny. Now I think it's hysterical. Um, so
Oh my gosh. I appreciate that because I'm that girl who's like making jokes at a funeral. Not because I'm insensitive, because I'm highly sensitive and I'm very emotionally intelligent, but it's a coping skill is to find laughter and lighten a situation because I always want to bring ease to others. So I resonate with your mother, and I would be the same way. I would be making jokes and not insensitively, but I think we take ourselves too serious.
yeah, well, a lot of it also is you know, your view of everything changes with your perspective. Um, in the beginning of my memoir, I have the phrase "comedy is just tragedy plus time," and over time, the amount of time that needs to go by before tragedy becomes comedy has become less and less. So
I am writing this down. Comedy is tragedy plus.
tragedy plus time. Yeah, I think that was Steve Allen, the first Tonight Show host, said
Nice.
that.
I love that. I
But
really like that. So you're just so inspirational, and I love it with between the books and the music, and just really you've changed your whole life around. And now, what would be and in the life coaching arena, everybody has to have this niche, right? And I want to know when you get your degree in counseling, what is the area you would like to specialize in to help people the most?
well, I mean, initially, my thought was to work with people recovering from brain injuries,
Hmm.
just because I feel like I have specific insight into that process. But I also think dealing with really difficult life transitions, because it is applicable. Um, so that's probably where I will end up in that.
I love that. I really like that. And yeah, I do think we need to stay in our wheelhouse. I think we can do the most good when we stay in our wheelhouse. And there's a lot of coaching and counseling and therapy out there that's very general. And I find when you have life experiences, we talked about before we started recording, when you have that experience, you're bringing that much more. And it's like I said in the last podcast with the last guest, I feel like the sandwiching in between for me being a life coach is the bringing the education and the experience, but bringing that together. And I think you're gonna do so well with that because people listen when you've been there. People don't listen when you've read about it. We can all read about it. I can go get a book at Barnes and Noble right now and read about something. But I think when your personal experience is there, you have firsthand experience, and people take that more serious and really look up, to someone as a mentor who's been there, done that. You think so?
Yeah, I mean that's the hope.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm excited for you and your future. And so as I close up every podcast, there's two questions that I ask. And the first one is, under 10 words, what would you tell your younger self now that you've been through what you've been through and you know what you know? What are the things that you would tell yourself under 10 words?
Well, I think I would probably I used to have a post-it note that I would keep above my desk that just read "Rome wasn't built in a day." That was really helpful to kind of keep me grounded when I was really overwhelmed. So I think I would probably reiterate that.
Yeah, Rome wasn't built in a day. And I think the theme of the essence of who you are is containing expectations and controlling expectations and allowing things to happen the way they're going to happen. And you've learned flow. You've learned that things just go the way they go, and it's about how I react to them that matters, and not really what has happened. So I love that. Okay, on a fun note,
Sure.
so here's my last question, and it's called Take My Money. And what I do is I look up fun and weird things that you could buy. And I've got to find my notes. I found some really weird stuff on Amazon recently. And I want to know from you, what is the weirdest thing you've seen for sale, the weirdest thing you've bought, or a thing that you buy that you have to have that most people don't? So it's wide open, any of those options that you've seen.
Okay, well, earlier today, I'm a huge fan of the band Sleep.
Mm-hmm.
They're a heavy metal band. And I was looking because recently they had a bootleg for sale, vinyl bootleg that I was going to get for a friend, except it was really expensive. So then that took me down the rabbit hole of finding various products that the band has, like merch and stuff. And they have a snow globe. So that was one of the weirdest things I'd seen. Sleep, the band, has a snow globe with one of the figures from their songs in the middle of it.
That's super unique. A very gentle dichotomy of a hard rock band. I think that's very cool. What is something you buy that, like, people have quirks. I'm finding people have really quirky things. My husband and I, we use two different types of toilet paper in this household. He's got one where he likes gas station toilet paper, and I'm the opposite, where I'm like, it needs to be like 20 ply. So what's something that you have to have, and no matter what, you cannot compromise? It's a non-negotiable.
Wow, that's a great question. Because I'm not sure if I have anything now that would be something I wouldn't compromise on. I'm sure there is. I'm sure if I could think about it, probably not that I get any type of specific coffee, but I probably would need for it to be a certain, either brand or flavor or quality, probably a certain quality. I don't think I could do like Folgers crystals or anything like that. So that's really my only specific. It's got to be coffee that I would drink.
Yes. And coffee drinkers, we're serious about our coffee. Like, there is, there's like, I've seen these memes on Facebook or whatever, where they have all the different shades of coffee, and they're like, which one are you? I mean, people are specific, and I'm very specific about my coffee as well. I don't know why, but we get into these creature comforts that we love as humans, and we're like, it has to be this way. And My best friend, she lives in Texas, and so she comes over and she'll buy, if I go there, they buy a box of the kind I like at Costco. And when she comes, she doesn't like my coffee. I got to buy her specific. So yes, I'm with you on that. Coffee drinkers are very, very serious about their coffee. All right. Well, so guys, if you want to find Andrew, he's at andrew-davie.com, and all of his information is there. And I'm going to post it as well on his podcast when it goes live, or when I publish it. And are all of your books available at Amazon and other places?
Yeah, they're all, I think they're the latest publisher that I've worked with. The print is on Amazon. There's audiobooks, and then all the e-readers. But if you go through their website, it'll have links to everything.
Great.
And then that's through my website. So
okay, perfect. My last question. I think fiction writers are geniuses because I'm a nonfiction writer and I just don't know that I have that creativity in me to do fiction. So this is my own personal question. Your crime fiction, is it like a psychological thriller? Is it like the whodunit at the end, or is it like, tell me about it.
No, it's mostly so I have the first one that I wrote became a series, and I really liked. There is a series of books about a detective named Nero Wolfe, who never left his brownstone. He lives in New York, I think in the 30s, and he's very eccentric. He's kind of like Sherlock Holmes, so he would never leave, and he had an associate who would do all the legwork. And then the associate would bring him the clues, and he would figure out who the murderer was, call everyone to his apartment, and then the police would arrest them. So I really liked that concept.
Yeah.
So I created a duo that operates out of a diner, and one of them never leaves the diner. He just basically eats pancakes and bacon and drinks coffee, and his partner does all the legwork, but his partner doesn't want any of the acclaim, so it works really well for them. And then through that, just having ideas about potential clients or things they could get involved with. You just sort of hear about things that sound interesting, and
ooh, that sounds fun. That sounds really, really good. Okay, I'm gonna go on and get that today because I love it. That's just, it takes a creativity to create fictional characters. I mean, I'm writing nonfiction, like this is my life. It's not that hard to create these characters. They're not created, they're real. So I think it's very cool to make characters lovable and to be able to connect with them. Even if you don't like them, you still connect and you still want them to win. And I just think I have a lot of respect for fiction writers. So I love that mutual respect that we have as authors. Well, thank you so much for being on, Andrew. I just got so much information from you. You should be so proud of what you've accomplished and your purpose in life, and that now your mission is to help others. And I think it's a beautiful thing. And I just am so grateful for your time today. So thank you for being on.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. All right, guys. Well, that's going to wrap it up for today. If you are looking for any relationship coaching, dating coaching, life coaching, which is for me, I do the confidence coaching, self-esteem, then you can find me at lifecoachmaureen.com. And my books are also at Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Target, and Walmart. And they are My Dog is More Enlightened Than I Am, and My Dog is My Relationship Coach. So I hope everyone has a fabulous day today. And I thank you all for listening. Don't forget to leave those 5-star reviews. They're so appreciated. And share this with your people, share this with your groups, share this with anyone that needs to get inspired and feel hope if they feel stuck in their life. Because that's really the purpose that I'm doing this for, is to reach and be those ripples out there in the world. So thank you all and have a fabulous day. Until next time, we'll see you later.
Thank you for tuning in to the I Never Knew podcast. If you found today's episode inspiring and educational, please be sure to follow, subscribe, and spread the word. The more people that join the Inc. community, the more it can develop and influence others as we work together for a healthier and brighter future. Until next time.